Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. So, Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine with one main goal, he claimed, to push NATO away from Russia's borders. But in one of the biggest tactical errors of the 21st century, his war is doing the exact opposite. He hasn't just pushed Finland and Sweden into the alliance. Now, he may have set in motion an even more unthinkable shift. A country that has been a cornerstone of European neutrality for like 70 years is now openly debating a move that will be an absolute disaster for Putin's ambitions. Austria is now considering NATO. Smooth move, Vlad, mate. Smooth move, son. But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So, to really get an idea of how huge this is, because there's a lot of countries that have shifted their position in the past few years. So we have to understand what neutrality is to Austria, right? It's not just a policy. It's baked into the fabric of the modern Austrian state. It was for some other European countries as well, who, as I say, they've changed their position since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine as well. So after the Second World War, Austria was occupied by four allied powers. You had the United States, Soviet Union, UK and France, right? So for 10 years, its future was like stuck in limbo. It was a pawn in the opening moves of the Cold War, basically. And the price for its freedom was all foreign troops to leave. You know, it was for the Austrian State Treaty of 1955. And that deal was effectively a promise. Later that year, the country passed a constitutional law, the Declaration of Neutrality, which cemented Austria's place in the world, making it illegal to join any military alliance or allow foreign military bases on its soil. Complete neutrality for like 70 years, not just a paper treaty and a source of national identity. Like, people in Austria have now grown up with this idea, with this, you know, woven into the fabric of Austria. It allowed Austria to become a hub for diplomacy because it was a bridge between the East and the West. Vienna became a city full of, plenty of films about it, spies, but also summits. It was a place where enemies could talk on neutral ground. It was a policy that was seen as the ultimate guarantee of Austria's security, a promise that seemed unbreakable. But it turns out promises are only as strong as the world they exist in. And that world has now changed because of one nutter who didn't like the Cold War ending and wants it back. Only it won't come back in the same way it was before. February 24th, 2022, absolute turning point, not just for Ukraine, for all of Europe. Russian tanks rolled across the border and they didn't just shatter the peace, they shattered a sort of European illusion. The illusion that in the 21st century, neutrality is a sort of shield to protect you from raw aggression. You know, but for Finland and Sweden, the threat was, of course, immediate. You know, their decision to join NATO was very rapid. For Austria, doesn't share a border with Russia, the debate's slower, a bit more thoughtful. Still, the shockwaves from that invasion are impossible to ignore. The basic idea behind Austrian neutrality, that you can not only maintain a level of security, I mean, the argument is as well, if you're neutral, you can be useful in mediating. But that is now being questioned at the highest levels. Because there is no mediation with Putin, is there? While the government's official position, stated by former Foreign Minister Alexander Schallenberg, is that Austria is not considering joining NATO, and indeed that's the majority position within Austrian politics at the moment, you've got other voices breaking that taboo. The new foreign minister, Manuel Reisinger, Austria's current foreign minister, leader of the NEOS party, has been doing an interview with Die Welt and essentially said, yeah, neutrality might not be our thing now. It's a fairly radical statement. For the first time in generations, you've got a senior member of the government openly questioning the sacred cow of Austrian foreign policy that has existed through most people's lives in Austria, and calling for a real national debate on NATO. The invasion of Ukraine did something fairly unthinkable. It has forced Austria to look in the mirror and ask if what's worked for them for the past 70 years is going to work for the next 70. And in fact, potentially, is it going to be a liability for the next 70? You know, since 2022, a lot of attitudes towards defence in Europe, which arose out of the aftermath of the Second World War, have been called into question. We still laugh about the fact Poland are demanding to see Germany arm itself more quickly these days. But Putin has thrust us into a completely different world. And Trump has made that world even less secure for Europe. We can no longer lean on others in the way we did. While a political earthquake was happening in Vienna, the Austrian public still very much on that traditional ground. I mean, it's not an easy thing to shake, something that's been part of your society for so long. The idea of joining a military alliance like NATO is broadly still unpopular. Recent polling shows about 60% of Austrians are against joining NATO. It's only about 21% in favour. So you think, well, Putin's got nothing to worry about. But what you do is you look at the change in the number. There's a larger chunk now of the population that is now thinking, well, hang on a minute, I'm not sure. It's slow, but it's a clear shift from a few years ago when support for neutrality was like 75%. It's hesitation. And the hesitation makes sense. Neutrality is deeply ingrained in the national identity. And unlike Finland or, Baltic states in general, Austria doesn't share a border with Russia. So the threat is a little bit less immediate. The political scene reflects the split. The current government doesn't have a majority that wants to join NATO. The only party openly pushing for it is the NEOS party, which is a minority voice in parliament. But the fact that this debate is happening at all and still what is the highest level of government, that's important. Because for decades, even question neutrality was like politically brave. Now it's a headline topic. It's pushed by one of the country's top ministers. They haven't had to resign the day after doing it. So while the nation is divided on the solution, there's a growing agreement on the problem that the old way of thinking isn't necessarily enough anymore. The dam of public opinion, of course, has not broken and may not for some years, but the cracks are there. So why would one small landlocked country in the middle of Europe joining NATO, why would that be such a disaster for Vladimir Putin? It's not about the size of Austria's army. It's about geography. It's about symbolism and the complete collapse of the story Putin has been selling for quite a long time now. So geography first. So you look at Europe and you go, okay, Finland and Sweden joined, right? So NATO have built a solid northern wall now. But there's still a neutral gap in Central Europe. If Austria joins, that gap's almost completely sealed. NATO would form an unbroken line from the Baltic to the Black Sea. You'd have Switzerland as a neutral island in a sea of NATO blue. Yeah, but that's much further back. For the alliance, this creates strategic depth because it means you can move troops and equipment more easily. You can have a more unified European air defence. But another blow to Putin is symbolic. So for over 20 years, the Kremlin's main excuse for its aggression has been the story of NATO expansion, a hostile alliance, it claims, even though it's never invaded anyone, creeping towards Russia's borders to surround and threaten it. He uses that narrative to justify his actions at home and to create division in the West because he's got plenty of stooges in the West. Austria joining NATO would tear that story to shreds. Unlike countries that were once in the Warsaw Pact, Austria was in neither bloc. It was absolutely neutral. A decision to join would send a very clear message that countries aren't being tricked into NATO by America, especially as the current American leadership is very cool on NATO in general. They're being pushed into NATO by Russian aggression. Proves that the single greatest recruitment tool for the alliance is Vladimir Putin himself. NATO Employee of the Month for the last 2 years. Greatest recruiting sergeant they've ever had. Russia has already accused Austria of undermining its own neutrality just for siding politically with Europe on Ukraine, which shows just how nervous this debate makes Moscow. It's not just about losing a buffer state, it's about losing the argument. Would be a public and humiliating rejection of Russia's entire foreign policy and the motivation on which it's built, proving that Putin's actions create the very thing he claims he's trying to stop. I mean, you look at the irony here. The stated goal of the 2022 invasion was to stop NATO expansion and create a weak, demilitarized Ukraine. Putin wanted a smaller, divided NATO, pushed back from Russia's sphere of influence. What he's got is the exact opposite. Ukraine is probably now Europe's best army. It's certainly got the most experience. His actions have triggered the fastest NATO expansion in decades. Finland's got an 800-mile border with Russia. Sweden's got a strategic lock on the Baltic Sea. That has dropped generations of neutrality to run for the safety of the alliance. He didn't just get a stronger NATO. He's got a brand new border with NATO, pretty much double what it was before. Smooth move, Vlad. Smooth move. And now the domino effect continues. You've got the shockwaves reaching Vienna, a city that was once the symbol of Cold War neutrality. The debate in Austria, direct result of Putin's war. He started a fire that now threatens to burn down the very buffer zones he wanted to enlarge. Russia has already put Austria on its official list of unfriendly countries, a move that shows Vienna's support for Ukraine hasn't gone unnoticed. Moscow's diplomats claim Austria's neutrality is already a sham because it supports EU sanctions. That's not how you talk to a neutral partner, it's how you talk to an opponent in waiting. So that's, again, another push. That's not going to bring Austria on Putin's side. It's going to do the opposite. Every single move Putin has made to weaken the West has actually just made it more united. He tried to show Russia's strength, instead revealed its limits. He wanted to scare his neighbours into submission, instead terrified them into joining the world's most powerful military alliance. Pushing a country like Austria, the very symbol of European neutrality, to even think about abandoning that identity, it's not a sign of strength, it's a sign of massive strategic failure on Putin's part. And the fact that he worked so long on getting Trump on his side has also been part of his strategic failure. Because another thing that's uniting Europe, like at the moment, is the fact that we cannot now rely on America. Putin thought he had, if you pardon the expression, a trump card in Hungary and now Slovakia. But all that's happened, whenever Orban, for example, frustrates EU or NATO efforts, they just kick him in the balls until he behaves. The bulk of European powers have lost patience with Russia's toadies. So will Austria join NATO tomorrow? No, this is not going to be a quick thing. Public opinion is nowhere near there yet. The political path is some way off. But just as with Brexit in the UK, the story here is one of trajectory. A senior member of the Austrian government has openly talked about it. The most important part of this story is that the question is being asked, where once it was unthinkable. The fact that a nation so committed to this neutral identity that, as I say, the vast majority of Austrians have grown up with, it's natural to them, it's as natural as breathing. The fact that they're having a serious public conversation about joining a military alliance is a stunning defeat for Russia. I mean, it's a big thing to get a country of people who've grown up with a particular national identity to suddenly question it. And an absolute humiliation for Putin's stated aims. It shows that the old European security model, where neutrality was a safe bet, that's potentially dead. Putin's war and Trump's approach has suggested that in a world with aggressive dictators, there might be no safe sidelines. You're either defended by a collective alliance or you're a target. The debate in Austria is the latest chapter in a story that Putin started, but whose ending he can no longer control. But sure, Putin's a strategic genius, don't you know? Now, do you know what he actually is? Like Trump, he's someone who benefited from weakness from the people who should have opposed him before things got too serious and got caught up in his own ego. He spent the Cold War drinking coffee in Germany, thinking he was a tactical genius. Like a certain corporal who spent the First World War in the trenches. But as soon as their neighbours decided that enough was enough, they realised they may have overestimated their hand. But let me know what you think in the comments below. For more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.